So, just to follow up on the Steve Allen show, how long did you guys work there, and why did you leave?
We were there 2 seasons, 2 full seasons, and we did, I think, just under 400 hour-and-a-half shows over those 2 years. And we left, when each season would end, we wouldn't necessarily know it was going to be picked up for another. And it certainly was for the second season when we were there. So we got an offer to go to the Don Knotts show. Uh, and, that was Don Knotts had an hour NBC variety show in 1970, this would have been. And this was after 5 or 6 years in a row, it seemed like Don had won the Emmy for a supporting actor on Andy Griffith's show. So we thought this was great, and we'd seen Don a million times because he had done the Steve shows in New York, and he'd been on with us when we did the Steve Allen show. We'd written sketches for Don. So, this was a sure thing. And it was all of Steve's people. Bill Harback was producing it. Bill Dana was the head writer. And of course, Don. And Nick Vanoff was the associate producer. All had done Steve shows in New York. So, they called Steve and said, "What do you think about Davis and Pollock?" And Steve, put his stamp on it, so that was good enough for them. And when we had the meeting over there, Don was in the meeting and said, we pointed out we had written sketches for Steve and Don Knotts when he was on our show, and Don said, "Yeah, they were funny." So it was, it was a nice fit for us. So. As it turned out, the Don Knotts show was not successful. It was and it was set for 24 shows. So we had to, by the second or third week, we were. Let's see who was beating. I forget what we were on opposite, but it was clear that Don wasn't at his best hosting an hour variety show. He was great playing his characters, and probably, I mean, I don't know this as a fact, but I sense probably at that point in time, America just wanted to see him as Barney Fife, and missed him from the Andy Griffith show. And of course, he couldn't do that every week and be in various sketches.
Well, there was sort of there was a history, I think, in television variety shows of people who really aren't very good at hosting. I mean, Sid Caesar is a classic example. Guy, he a wonderful sketch comic, but couldn't stand in front of the audience and be himself. And maybe they felt that Don, would be one of those kind of people who could just sort of get through it, But the sketches were the characters, as Dave said. I mean, he wasn't a versatile. He's a great funny guy, but he wasn't versatile. That was the second. We'd actually that was a huge thing for us because we were doing, full-time sketch writing and some different kinds of things, and we'd already done a little of that on the Glenn Campbell show when we were there for was it a summer show at that time, or
no? It was
the regular thing, but we went back.
It was a mid-season replacement. This is between the two Steve Allen seasons. We did the Glenn Campbell show, and again, Bernie Kukoff and Jeff Harris were the head writers there. So
a lesson, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Glenn Campbell, was that originally a summer fill-in
was.
show for the Smothers Brothers?
It was called the Summer Brothers Smothers Show.
Right.
When it was on in the summer, it was so successful they brought it back in mid-season.
Yeah. And in fact, they were guests on. We wrote for them on a sketch on the Glenn Campbell show. I think wasn't that the Hippo?
Yes. Yeah. The Smothers Brothers were guests.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk briefly about Glenn Campbell. What was he like to work with, and what kind of a host was he?
We thought he was great, and we had very little contact with Glenn. I think that it was sort of typical of the relationship one has often on variety shows, which is that you're not really that close with the performers. On a situation comedy, you go down to the stage a lot, and you watch a lot of what's being done, and you're rewriting what's being done a lot. So there tends to be a little bit more of a relationship with the actors. But on variety shows, very often you're just off writing, and then you go to a dress rehearsal, and then they do the show. So Glenn was a nice guy, but I don't remember ever having
I don't
any
ever
sort of
remember having
relationship
a
with him.
conversation with him, or
No.
maybe passing in a hall and saying hi, but that was about the extent of it. We did get to work with Jack Burns.
That was great.
Was one of the writers there who we had seen for years doing those two-man bits on variety shows with his then partner Avery Schreiber, and Jack was just. He's one of the funniest guys on this planet. You can't be around him without laughing all the time. Just instinctively funny.
Is he the one who later hosted Fridays, that sketch show that came out?
Yeah, I don't know that he hosted. Did he host it? But he certainly was on. He was the head writer there, I think,
Okay.
too.
Right.
Yes, same
So
guy.
when you were doing Campbell, were Rob Reiner and Steve Martin writers who weren't yet famous at that point?
No,
opposite.
they were pretty well established. They had already started on the Smother Show.
Oh, okay. Right,
And I guess they had written for Glenn when he did that summer show, but they weren't on our staff. We had Jack Burns, Gordon Farr, and John Hartford was there, and I'm probably leaving. George Yannick was also there.
Was Mason Williams there, or that was?
Yes.
He subsequently came there. Yeah,
He was there during at the end of the time we were there.
yeah,
He came in.
yeah.
It's amazing how many of these writers were successful, or even had greater success
Yeah,
later.
Absolutely.
yeah.
One of the things that we were talking about recently, that just to give an idea of a little bit of what it's like to write comedy and to try to find times where you don't have to work. Ann says something about Jack, is that we would, every once in a while, we would gather in Jack's office, and he would call a horse race that he would, of course, make up as he went along. He was just ad-libbing, but we would all get very caught up in it because we wouldn't know.
We would all we would bet. All the writers would say, "Okay, I'll take this horse. I'll take that horse," and Jack Burns would just narrate in horse racing announcer style an entire horse race, with each guy pulling for his horse and nobody having any idea, probably even Jack at the time, who was going to win this race.
And what was the and then
Well, a classic race that we all remember was Jack is announcing this imaginary horse race, and he's got the horses coming around the clubhouse turn and heading into the backstretch, and he's going, Old Shoe is in the lead, and coming up on the outside is Box of Crayons. It's Box of Crayons and Old Shoe. They're coming down to the finish line, and it's a photo finish. And we had to wait around for 15 minutes while they developed imaginary photo.
I want to mention one more variety special you did,
Yeah.
just for a quick,
Yeah, sure.
Quick reaction, or what the experience was like.
Yeah.
And that's Don Rickles Alive and Kicking.
Well, yeah, that was Arnie
Rosen.
Arnie Rosen was the producer, whose name we had known from the Gleason show and Phil Silver's show.
He was a big deal,
Yeah,
Arnie Rosen,
yeah, and the Carol Burnett show, and he had written a number with his then partner Coleman Jacoby of the Bilko series. And this was a special with Don Rickles, and we had worked a lot with Don. We mentioned the Pat Boone show, where he had been a guest host for a week. We had done a show, we had written material for a show called Operation Entertainment, where various comics, George Carlin, we wrote for Dick Shawn and Dick Cavett, would go to military bases during the Vietnam War and they would do a variety show originating from the camp. And Rickles had been on one of those. And we'd written, he had a sitcom. That's what you're asking about?
No, he's asking
about
Alive and Kicking.
About
yeah.
that special.
the sitcom was dead often.
Yeah, but we had written an episode of his sitcom earlier too, so we knew his style. We were very familiar with it. So that was,
And we were big fans of his.
Yeah.
We really loved
and a
Don.
fun guy to be around.
Yeah.
Would you actually? He's pretty famous for his zingers.
Yeah.
Would
Oh,
you,
yeah.
Would you actually write those, or would you write other material in the?
Well, if
zingers
it was
all-
a scripted show,
Yeah.
yes, we would write those zingers. But when
he
he
was a-
would be on an ad lib show, like with Steve Allen or Pat Boone, no,
just-
you don't write anything.
No.
He
just went
everything he
through.
said he
He's
did.
Rickles, yeah.
Right.
We did do. We don't want to go back to Steve Allen's show, I know, but one sketch that Rickles was on was with a live camel. It was an Arabian Nights kind of sketch, and we just got this camel that the Wrangler had assured us would work perfect. He'd been in movies, Wranglers always tell you the animals will be perfect. This camel,
That'll reassure us
Yeah.
he's been in movies. Yeah.
and this camel just started making this horrible sound and spitting on Don and Steve, and Pat McCormick was in it, and somebody else I can't remember. And the sketch just ran for 20 minutes, because we never stopped tape. And this sketch ended up in both Don Rickles' autobiography and one of Steve's books too. But we had written for him a lot, so those cadences were very familiar to us. And as Elias said, we liked being around. We used to try to provoke him on shows, so he'd put us down.
Say something stupid.
Yeah, you could if you said the most innocuous kind of thing, like Steve or like Don, this is a new sweater. He'd rip you to shreds.
Oh man. I'm going to mention some sitcom titles, and if you
Okay.
could just give me maybe briefly what's significant about it, or
Sure.
what you did on the show, or something like that, just to give us an idea of why that was part of your kind of resume. Let's start with the Monkees.
We did a rewrite. It was a script that had been written by a guy named Dave Evans.
Yeah.
And that I think was our very first foray into
Sitcom.
into sitcoms, and it was called Monkey's Race Again, I think, and
Interestingly, in 1966, when the Monkees started, we had interviewed with Rafelson
that's
and
Schneider.
and to be on the staff, and did not get the job. And so here, like a year and a half later, this is while we were on the Joey Bishop show, we got called in to do this rewrite. I don't think we ever met
Never.
the Monkees, and we just met with Neil
Marlins?
Marlins was the story editor, and that was our only contact with the show. We
Yeah.
weren't there when they filmed it, and no real.
I don't remember that.
Stubby K was the guest star in it. It was about auto racing. That's about all I remembered.
But since it was your first scripted show, did you know how to do it? I mean, I know you know comedy, but did you know how to do the form of
Well,
it?
it was easy because it was a rewrite.
It was a rewrite.
So you had a script.
Yeah.
we had
yeah,
a script
yeah.
that they knew they wanted help with.
And they told us what where it didn't
Yeah,
work and,
yeah.
and where it did work, and so it was easy from that standpoint. But I don't remember that we ever felt that we had any sort of career that was about to be launched into sitcoms, which we were interested in doing, by the way, on the basis of that Monkey
Yeah.
script. It was just something we
Yeah.
did,
Yeah.
and like Dave said, we had very, very little to do with the whole, with the staff or anything. We just
I think we
did our
we
rewrite.
had looked at episodes of the show and tried to mimic, as we do on any show, as any writer does.
That's your job.
You just mimic, the voices of the characters on the show, and we did our best to do that. We probably, though, to your point, it probably wasn't our best work because we were so new at that.
Our best work is we're doing a job next week. It's great. It's going to be really good.
So was the entree to sitcoms for you? Was it the episode of All in the Family? that you
No, the entree was I think wasn't it was really the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Well, did that come?
Yeah, that
I
came
don't know,
before All
the
in the
Rickles,
Family.
the half-hour Rickles
Yeah,
show.
I think it came
Oh.
before that. Yeah, I mean the way I remember it was pretty clear that we had been interested in writing sitcoms. We'd always wanted to write sitcoms, and we had made, Dave mentioned some before, we'd made some attempts to write sitcoms. And we'd even gone to meet with a couple of writers with one writer we were later to work with, who was doing the show, and we wrote a spec script for that particular series, and it didn't impress them. But once again, I guess the theme that keeps coming up here is the people that you know that like you, that can mean something in your lives.
Yeah, you're right. We in fact were in London. We had done the Kraft Music Hall summer show with Mort Lockman, which starred Des O'Connor.
And I came back.
And
I came back because my wife was pregnant.
I stayed on in London. He came back, and
Bernie Weintraub said Sal and Bernie, two guys we've mentioned before, are doing the new Dick Van Dyke show, and they would like you guys to write a script. I mean, just because they liked us as writers and they knew us, and I guess they thought we could do a good job.
We had done that special for them, Super Bowl.
Yes.
On the eve of the Super Bowl, for a couple of years they did a big CBS
Super
special.
comedy.
Yeah, it's called the Super Comedy Bowl, and had Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, a lot of people were in it. We just did a bunch of football sketches, I guess. I have no memory of what we wrote.
Yeah, and I have no idea why they would think on the basis of that. I think there was just something about us. They knew us. They thought we were probably easy to work with, and that we delivered, and they needed this. And Dave came back from London, and we had a story to work on, and we would go up to his house, and
this was Carl Reiner. Now was the executive producer of the show, above Turteltaub and Ornstein.
And we wrote our script, and they liked it a lot.
So you wrote a few episodes, though. For the
We did end up writing
we were on
more
the
than a
staff.
few.
They hired us we were there 2 seasons, and
15 or some crazy thing.
yeah, I think 17 episodes we wrote, and rewrote others, because when you're on staff. First year it came from Phoenix, Arizona. This was the series that had Hope Lang as Dick's wife.
Well, so when both of you were ushers, taking us back,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
you would
yeah.
actually be on the set of the original Dick
Yes.
Van Dyke
Yeah.
show, and there was Carl Reiner, and
Yeah.
it was sort of like maybe moments of being in awe, I guess.
Yes,
Yeah.
and of
So what
those
was
two
that?
guys.
So now here you are on the new Dick Van Dyke
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
Carl Reiner is still
Yeah.
there. Dick Van Dyke. Was that a surreal experience? Or
Yes.
what was
Well,
that
we
like
certainly
to-
were aware of the ironies, and I remembered Carl from shows. So, in fact, he always.
Oh, of course.
He had even called me the
Interviewer.
reporter or something.
yeah.
The reporter, because I was always asking him always trying to provoke him into doing those double talk language things. And until he finally said, "Will you stop?"
It was great. It was great.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we went down to Phoenix the first year. We would fly down for 4 days. One of the two showrunners, Sal Turteltaub, lived in Phoenix. He moved to Phoenix, but
The rest of us commuted,
yeah,
including
we'd come
Carl,
down for
every week.
4 days. Carl would come down for 1 day just for the reading of the next week's script, and it was really a great experience for us, because if we wanted to get into the situation comedy business, here was somebody paying us to work on a big network show, and with really talented people, and to write one script after another. In those days, there weren't any rooms full of writers. We had our office, and Sal and Bernie had their office, and they wrote scripts. We wrote scripts. Freelance scripts came in, as Dave said, and we'd rewrite those.
And Carl was great to work
Was
for.
terrific.
He just made you feel part of this, part of the whole operation. Made you feel important, and a fun guy to hang out with.
Nice guy.
We were all these out of towners down in actually staying in Scottsdale, Arizona, at the Executive House, and he was always going to dinners with Carl, and he was just a fun guy to hang out with.
You mentioned rewrites. Is that where you had the title of story editor? Is that what that?
I believe that
encompasses?
was our title.
Yes, yes, we were. That was our. In those days, there were, the whole. There's been an evolution of writers' titles in situation comedy. In those days, we were the story editors, which basically meant that we were rewriting a lot of scripts.
Okay, All in the Family.
One episode of All in the Family, which was a great experience that I guess Norman just wanted to hire us, or he'd
I don't know how.
How
I
he
don't
got
remember
onto us.
how we how we ended up there, but we had been doing the Dick Van Dyke Show, so maybe there was some link there, or maybe we've just forgotten. But we ended up in a meeting with Norman Lear, who was running the show. That was the only show. This was obviously before all those other Lear and Bud York and shows followed. And I remember we came in with all kinds of story outlines and all, and I guess there was one that he picked, and he sent us over to the farmers market. This is a TV city, and to just work on it and come back and repitch it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing to me. Because it has to do with what this particular episode was about, and it also has to do with our whole experience writing for Dick Van Dyke and then later. I think the thing that writers who work in situation comedy discover very early on, and every situation comedy writer you'll talk to is going to say this: the big problem is the story. That's where you really kill yourself, and coming up with a good story is in many ways harder than writing a script. I mean, once you know the characters and you've got the story worked out, that it's a matter of time and talent, and to write a decent script. But coming up with a story that really works and that everybody responds to and everybody on a show feels is going to be a really solid episode is a tough thing. And this story I can't count the number of stories we've done, but this one stands out because it worked really well, and it's easy to tell, and it was about Edith getting a hand-me-down mink coat from a cousin, and Archie just being outraged at the idea that she was going to take this mink coat because we don't take charity. Yeah. And so Archie insists that the mink coat goes back. Before it goes back, it gets stained and it goes to the cleaners. And when it's at the cleaners, it gets ruined, and there's insurance, and there's a big check. And Archie's whole attitude about taking charity changes totally when he's faced with the big check as opposed to Edith's mink. And that just felt so good to us. It just felt like such a wonderful, a wonderful meal to be able to sit down and eat. And that was a nice experience.
Did doing that show specifically lead you to any other jobs?
It might have helped us get that next job with Norman. I don't know.
The next,
Hot El Baltimore.
Oh,
do you think, or maybe not?
Maybe
Yeah.
that came a few years later. Yeah. I know from the Dick Van Dyke Show. I know that we worked with Bill Persky there, and who directed some of the shows, and Jay Sandridge directed a lot of the Dick Van Dyke shows, and that certainly helped us get the Mary Tyler Moore Show, because he mentioned us to Alan Burns and Jim Brooks, and the Steve Allen Show, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, I know were instrumental in just the titles of the show carried so much weight that it, I'm sure, got us a lot of jobs.
Did you go in and pitch for Mary Tyler Moore Show?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And you did a few episodes of that. Right?
4.
Yeah, I think we did 4 episodes over about 2 years there, and then stayed on working at MTM on the Paul Sand Show. But each time, we would pitch an episode, and it was great. We learned a lot working with Alan Burns and Jim Brooks. Just fun guys to be around, and it was a great experience. And Ed Weinberger too. and Treva Silverman was there too, and that was their staff, really, a very small staff, and the show was hugely popular, and it was fun to go to the filmings. The writers were always introduced, and
Writers spend a lot of time writing shows they don't particularly think are that great, and that wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real treat to be on a show where as Dave said, the characters are so, actors are great. The people who created it really knew what they were doing.
And remember earlier I was saying when we were talking about the Don Knotts show, I couldn't remember what bumped us off the air on Tuesday nights. It was the Mary Tyler Moore show.
That's right.
It comes back to me now.
And there was that quote, right?
I know we were so excited because we thought, geez, we got Don Knotts, won all these Emmys, and we're going against Mary Tyler Moore, who was just off the Dick Van Dyke show. They didn't have Dick. They had, Mary. Dick was the funny guy. And so, boom, we were off.
And she was quoted as, I remember in maybe the trades, as saying how upset she was that they had slotted her, that they had put the Don Knotts show in against her, because she said the same thing. This guy's a huge star, and what chance do I have?
Yeah. Ultimately, Mary Tyler Moore show, I think, was moved to Saturdays a few years later. But
So what was the trick to capturing the voice of characters that are well-known and beloved by coming in and writing for a show like Mary Tyler Moore?
well, we both had watched the shows just as viewers, and we had heard their voices, in our ears. At first, it can be a little rocky.
Yeah.
But over time, you just, you pick up the rhythms, the speech rhythms, the cadences, the attitudes of the characters, and
I think the job we saw it was just what you're talking about. That the job was to make sure that we had immersed ourselves so much, so we would try to get scripts of the shows that we were going to write. We would want to read the script so that we could get a real sense of who the characters were.
Would you do that before you even pitched?
Oh.
Just so you are kind of conversing?
Not as much as after we certainly thought we knew the show before we pitched, but
if we were going in on a show where we didn't know it, we would probably get the bunch of tapes or scripts and study them. I don't know. I think we felt pretty secure on the Mary Tyler Moore show, and the story meetings with Jim and Alan and Ed were very detailed. I mean, you left there with a ton of notes, and you knew every scene, and you knew every attitude.
Some jokes.
Yeah. Some jokes arrived at right in the story meeting were included in the notes, and you knew all the attitudes of each character and the progression through every scene of the whole story. So you felt pretty confident when you left with just the story notes. They never, as Carl used to say on the Van Dyke show, we won't send you up in a crate.
What Steve said here, I think, is really important. That the reason one of the reasons you get hired from one show to another is because you understand that your job is to come up with a really good facsimile of what that show is. We knew writers who would get a job on a sitcom and they would say, well, it's okay, but I know how to do it better. And I'm going to show these people, what they could be doing if they really understood it. And then they write a show that's not a reasonable facsimile, but is their improvement, and it never worked.
We always were confident in the fact that we could never do it better.
That's right.
I've heard for a long time that advice to writers who are writing a spec script is never submit the spec script to the show that you're writing as a spec script.
Yeah.
Is that true? Would you find that's generally true?
Well, today they don't do that as much, but it certainly was.
And the reasons are fairly obvious in that you can't presume to know it better than the people who are doing it for a living every single day.
But you can write one that people who aren't doing it every day might think is pretty good because they're not dealing,
Yeah.
with all the subtleties.
If it's another show.
Yeah. If it's on
There's one more show I wanted to mention, and it's primarily because you work with Patty Chayefsky, called
yeah.
Your Place or Mine.
Yeah.
What was that like going into it, and what was your anticipation of working with him, and then how did it turn out?
Boy, that was a great.
Great
That was
experience,
one of
yeah.
our great.
Yeah. Our anticipation, I guess,
experiences.
was well, I know for me, was to try to conceal the fact that I was in awe of the guy and to just look like a fellow pro in there to do a job. And if he was had a similar offhand attitude towards the two of us,
He hit it.
he was more convincing. But we were thrilled to get the job. It was just a total out of the blue thing, and it was on the strength really of a Mary Tyler Moore Show script that we sent. And this was a pilot called Your Place or Mine with James Coco, which was to take place in New York. And of course, we had seen, the hospital, and we had seen Marty even before that, but that was about it. All his big dramas on NBC years earlier when we were in high school, I know I hadn't seen any of them. So the task was to try to write like Patty, and to try to, he had this,
Well, tell him why. Tell him why why he wanted to hire. Why would Patty Chayefsky want to hire anybody to help him at all? And it was because he felt that he knew he had 2 pilots to do for NBC. He had an hour pilot and a half-hour pilot, and he felt totally confident in his ability to write a 1-hour pilot. That was his bread and butter. But he had never done a sitcom, and he just didn't think he necessarily, which is it says a lot when Patty Chayefsky says, I think maybe I could use a little help in getting set off in the right direction on doing a situation comedy because I haven't had that experience. And he came to California with the goal in mind of finding writers to help him do that. So that was terrific.
Years earlier, he had done a Marty. There was a Marty pilot with the guy who played the father on Happy Days,
Tom Bosley?
Tom Bosley in the Marty role, and he wanted nothing to do with the writing, and also he was planning on his movie careers, and he wanted somebody who would take over the show. So in a way, we each wrote a script. We worked out the story in his office in New York together. Then he stayed in his office and wrote his version of the script, and he found an office for us down near Times Square, and we went there and wrote our version, which was mainly, I think, a security blanket to know that somebody could at least write in the style of this show.
But we spent a long time working out the story with him in his office.
Yeah, a long time. And it was just a fun experience. He was just a very, he was funny. He had a sort of a Bronx vibe about him, very comfortable to be around. We always tell it, we tell this story about one day Elias and I, we loved Nathan's hot dogs, and they were opening up a new Nathan's at Times Square. Mm-hmm. Previously, they were only way out at Coney Island, and our office was just up 7th Avenue, on the 11th floor above the Carnegie Deli. So he heard us, babbling on about Nathan's hot dogs. So he said, "Come on!" His mouth was watering. Let's go. We were there in the dead of winter, in the middle of January. We put on our coats and we go marching down 7th Avenue, wolfing down these Nathan's hot dogs and the cottage fries, and then we're all done, ready to go back. And Patty says, "Yeah. So what do you think, guys? What do you want to do? Do you want to take a cab? What do you want to do?" And Elias said, "I don't know, Patty. What do you want to do?"
First guy to ever do that.
Yeah. if this was, if Elias was the 914th guy to say that to Patty, he had the good grace not to mention it.
Yeah. Dave and I have done a little talking about this. The people that we've worked with that really have made a big impression on us. You know, that, I mean, we've talked about a lot of people here that you know, that we worked with. We had a really good time. They were really good writers, and we worked with them multiple times on various shows. But Patty, I think we went into the job with the idea that whatever happened, we probably could learn something, you know, and we did, and he had, what he had was a tremendous kind of energy and passion for writing. We both, I'm sure, remember this really clearly, and I don't think anybody else we ever worked with had this. But he had a book stand in his office, and an unabridged dictionary on it. You know, Patty Chayefsky has an unabridged dictionary as one of his tools of writing in his office, and used it a lot. He would just get up and go over there and check, because he was trying to deal with the characters and the way they would talk and the kinds of things that would give them definition. And he would say, well, you know, in this particular thing, these two people are going to be talking, or this guy is going to be talking, and we were all coming up with these characters for the first time. He would then just type dialogue or monologues for these characters about anything. It had nothing to do with the story.
Total dummy dialogue. He just roll in a sheet of paper and just start typing.
Just to get the characters.
For us, the big difference was that, you know, like Marty and all of his early television dramas, the characters were all these ordinary people, you know, often blue-collar people dealing with mundane, everyday situations. Nothing theatrical about them. So any jokes or any comedy had to be strictly out of the emotions of the characters, and totally honest. He called it, you know, writing dialogue as if it had been wiretapped. You know, if you were to just secretly record some guy on the street, he wouldn't be talking in punchlines and perfect English. And so we desperately wanted to please him when we went off to write the script. And sometimes
we really did.
You know, we carried it on to ludicrous proportions. I remember once we had an argument about a totally incidental character, an unseen voice on a apartment intercom of a doorman downstairs who we had named Wally, and we debated over whether Wally was too much of a cliche name of these kind of characters that we had seen in mid-50s comedies. And
I remember, yeah.
And I mean, ultimately the name stayed in, I guess. But that's how, you know, that's how ludicrous it was that we tried to coincide our style with Patty's.
I just remember when we were writing, because we didn't, is this right? We didn't come back to LA to write.
No,
we
we
actually
did it all
wrote
in
it
New York.
right there. He was writing and we were writing.
He gave us a typewriter.
It was so amazing.
And, we used, this is obviously way before computers.
Yeah.
And we had this shabby little office down above the old Latin Quarter.
Yeah.
On 48th Street, which had
So-
been bolted.
But I remember once you know, Dave and I were working, and I just got really angry or intense or something that wasn't very pleasant. And I remember apologizing, and I remember that the would you of course remember I apologized. And the
No, I don't remember this.
You don't remember that. But I honestly remember that the thing that got me to feel that way was the need, and I'm sure Dave and I both had it, it's just that he was better at dealing with it than I was, to do this really well. Like, this was really important to us, to write something that would be really good. And we did, for once, you know, and on other shows we had the same feeling. We knew what good, we thought we knew what good would be. You know, we thought we knew the standard that we were trying to reach. It was great.
We did trade on the script. I mean,
Yeah.
it did get us a few jobs.
Yeah.
So what was the
We did.
Was there one reason that it didn't work?
Well, I think it was so.
Yes.
You got to remember this
Yes.
was way before this was 1974, so way before the sexual revolution was sort of a cliche. It was so. It was just so ahead of its time. I mean, Patty's script was funny, but it was very brutally honest and frank, and it was hard for us even when we read it to see how
Yeah.
NBC would put this on. To this day, we still can't figure out. I had breakfast recently. In fact, we both even had lunch with Howard Gottfried, who was the executive producer and Patty's longtime partner. And the unanswered question to us is, what did NBC think they were getting when they hired Patty? It was just too honest for 1974. And of course now, after we've had Sex and the City and all these other shows, it would be totally harmless.
I think that also. I mean, I read it recently, after not having read it for all those years, and I think that it sort of ties into what Dave's saying. As a situation comedy pilot, it didn't quite work. I mean, there are conventions about situation comedies and ways that if you're picturing a series, relationships between characters that you establish and that you kind of can understand how those are going to continue through maybe 5 years or 10 years of a show if you're lucky. And I don't think Patty or Dave and I ever succeeded in doing that kind of work, which was to understand how, when this script is done, it's going to continue. And Patty also was just a brilliant as comedic writer, as we know from his movies. I mean, fantastic. But those movies were, standalone pieces of work.
And I think also, I know we had sort of second thoughts about James Coco being the right guy for the part. I think Patty maybe secretly did too. And I know Delbert Mann, who directed it and who had directed all those Philco Goodyear Playhouse and the Marty movie, certainly had reservations about Jimmy Coco. So that didn't help. But I think the script and the concept was just the main problem.
So let's move on to a show that did last 10 years. I think actually 11 years.
11.
Carol Burnett Show.
Oh, Carol Burnett did that last year.
Yeah. Well, we came along late in the game, and we got that job because we had Dick Clare and Jenna McMahon as performers, guests on the Steve Allen Show about a dozen times. They did an act together and little vignettes, and were really funny. And they had been writers on the Burnett Show, not from the beginning, but for a long time. And so that helped us. Dick Clare put in a word. I guess they had an opening. Yeah, in fact, Barry Levinson and Rudy DeLuca were leaving the show. So we actually ended up in their office. And also, we had known that Carol took out an ad in the trades saying how great she thought Dick Van Dyke was in an episode that we had written where he's out on a ledge of a building for essentially the whole half hour talking to himself on a ledge. No other performers except for the very beginning. And so we somehow got that message either to Dick Clare or something. But anyway, we ended up working there. Joe Hamilton was the executive producer, and we were working with Norman Lear's former partner, Ed Simmons, who was the head writer. And it was a great job. I mean, we loved, it was writing sketches again. Next door to us was Bill Richmond, a fun writer and a great guy. We went a million lunches with him and his partner Gene Parrott. We'd worked with Bill earlier on a Mel Torme special where we first met him years earlier at CBS.
He was a drummer.
He was
professional jazz drummer.
he had
yeah,
great
big band
stories.
drummer.
Big band drummer with the Harry James Band and Les Brown, and just a fun guy. Be a great interview for you guys here, in fact. And so it was. We were there for one season, and then they started making changes. And I think I might be right. I think it was Harvey Korman's last year. And although the series did come back, I think Dick Van Dyke then came and took, as I remember, it took Harvey's part and did the last year on the Carol Burnett show.
Was there a writer's room on that show?
No, right. No, every writer just in their own room writing sketches. There was another team, Rick Hawkins and Liz Sage and Roger Beatty, Adele Styler, and Adele and Bert Styler.
So what was your process? Would you write a sketch and present it to Carol or to
No.
someone else? Or?
No, the process was the show ran just like a well-oiled machine. I mean, every Friday at 4:30 they taped a dress, and every 7:30 they taped an air show. You wrote. Our assignment was we wrote for Harvey and Carol, and we didn't worry about guest stars. We would clear the premise with Ed Simmons, and go right and either get an okay or not. We got several premises turned down. When it was accepted, you went and you wrote the sketch for Harvey and Carol. If later it worked better for a guest, then it went to the guest. For example, I know we wrote a sketch where Harvey was a nightclub comic, a Don Rickles kind of insult comic, and the show bombs well, it's pointless to describe the sketch, but as it turned out, Steve Lawrence was going to be a guest, so he took the part. He was perfect.
Yeah.
So it was, and we wrote a lot of just two-person sketches, and that was it. We other than Carol coming by into our office the first week and looking around at this tiny little cubicle we're in, and remarking that it certainly needed the woman's touch. I think that was about the only real conversations we ever had with her. Ed and Joe Hamilton, they were the liaison to Carol. We would see a run-through every Wednesday, and we would be in the rehearsal hall for that, but that was it.
Was the style of the show, I remember, if they made a mistake, they'd laugh through it. It seemed like they didn't the feeling was that they didn't do extra takes to clean things up, and kind of breaking up was okay a lot. Especially with Tim Conway and Harvey Korman.
It seems like you pretty much have it right. But they didn't have to do really, because they taped both the dress and the air. So they always sort of had that safety net under them when they did the air show. Saturday Night Live does that to this day.
When you're writing a sketch, when you were writing the sketch, being aware of it, did you actually think that there were parts or funny things that they would crack out?
Never.
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 We would write the sketch tight.
Okay.
To what we thought was a good sketch. I don't know that writers are necessarily love the breaking up of sketches. I don't think we did in any way, just speaking for us. But I think that was primarily to a Tim Conway, Harvey kind of thing. Those two had that going. I know we did a baggage handler sketch where Tim was the baggage handler on a conveyor belt going up to an airplane and putting the luggage on and stuff. And Harvey was the supervisor coming, and they didn't do any breakups in that sketch. It didn't happen with every single sketch.
No.
Was there much improv, or did they at least attempt to
They pretty
stick to
much
the
stuck
scripts?
right to the
Right
to the sketch.
Do you have any favorite sketches that either you wrote or you enjoyed on that show?
Oh boy,
We liked that, even though it wasn't the only one they did, the elevator.
Yeah,
thing.
there was a
We liked
yes.
that.
There was a format that they had used previously. We didn't invent this. in the one we did, it was Carol and Roddy McDowell are both enter an elevator and they realize they recognize each other. It's taking place in London, and they know they've recognized each other from the past, and each line of dialogue is just one word. It was, Sally, Harvey, Sally, yes. In 1958, 59, did we? No. Yes. It was all. It just goes like that. And doing it in British, doing it in clip British, sort of lent itself to.
And they were great.
And they were great at doing it. And but again, we didn't. That was
Just one we wrote.
That was a format that they had, and so we just inherited that.
When you wrote sketches, did they ever come from your own lives, or were you inspired by real things, or did you just try to make it up?
You're talking about specifically the Burnett Show? Probably not from our lives, I wouldn't think.
That's an interesting question. I mean, not to move backwards, but stories from our lives would often enter into the situation comedy story area, and Carl Reiner really encouraged that. I mean, I remember that when I mean, just two quick examples to not tell the whole story, but I remember that when my late wife and I were in college together, she was in her dorm room and she accidentally sat down on a bed and she was doing some sewing or something and suddenly couldn't find a needle that she had been using, and got worried that maybe she'd actually somehow sat on that needle, and so we went to the UCLA emergency room, and where an intern kind of guy or a young resident, whatever it was, did an X-ray and found that she had in fact sat on the needle, and they had to remove it. And that became that idea called The Needle became an episode of the new Dick Van Dyke Show, which Albert Brooks or Richard Dreyfuss was the a doc who was Carl had known since he was a kid.
My wife and I had been in a trip to Europe, had arrived at our hotel in Salzburg late, and the room had been given away, and we had to wake the guy up at the hotel, and he had a hearing. We had to talk into his little hearing thing. It was just really ludicrous. I won't go into the whole thing, but that became an episode too of a Dick Van Dyke Show.
Often that would happen,
but not to the Burnett sketches. I wouldn't think those were a little, those were more theatrical and sketchy, and had to be big and play to particularly Carol and Harvey's talents.
The show had sketches and it had movie spoofs also.
Yeah.
Did you write any of the spoofs?
I think we did one, a takeoff on Young Man with a Horn that I think never was used. Most of ours were, Rick and Liz called us the urban writers. We would do things about, I know one was Carol shows up. Let's see, how did the IRS sketch? She shows up at the IRS with for tax returns.
Yeah.
And she meets Harvey there sitting in the waiting room, and Harvey's going on about, I know how to do. No way, Harvey shows up with his tax return. That was it, and he meets Carol, who's sitting there in the waiting room too. Drinking a cup of coffee, and Harvey's going on about, I got this beat. I got collapsible corporations and write-offs, and I got capital gains over here, and this and that, and they'll never catch me. And then Carol looks at her watch and says, "Well, 2:00, back to work." And it turns out she's working there. She's the examiner. I think you're next, Mr.
One of the most famous, of course, movie spoofs is "Went with the Wind."
Yes, we were there.
Yeah.
We didn't write it, but
yeah. We didn't write that sketch, but we we cherish that sketch because it's that clip of the
It's funny.
of
Carol coming down the stairs.
Carol coming down with the curtain rod in her dress with the curtains. It's such a hilarious piece of business, and it was written by Liz Sage and Rick Hawkins, who wrote that sketch. And we had another sketch on it with just Carol and Harvey on the same show. So every time they run that clip, and they just run it at every testimonial, and, we get a little residual on that. So it's,
We love it.
but we did not write that sketch.
Was the curtain rod part of the original?
Yes,
sketch?
it was.
It was.
And that's always been a bone of contention with Liz and Rick, because Carol always says that just out of the blue, her costume person, Bob Mackey, just came up with the idea, and it's right there. We have our scripts at home, and it's right there. The curtain rod was written in there by Rick and Liz.
The Carol Burnett show, you were on like about the 10th season, near the end of the run,
Yeah.
right? So you were there for one season. Why did you leave that show?
We just weren't picked up to do the next year. I don't know if there were a lot of changes there. I think the Stylers left. It was the big change. I think when Dick came in and Harvey left, and I'm not sure what we ended up going to. Back to London again and did a series with Jack Burns.
You know, what happens on these shows sometimes, and I think that, I don't remember the details of the Burnett show as well as Dave. But I do remember that, you sometimes, it's in a way what I was talking about before, writers bring something to their jobs and their sensibilities and what they think works and what they think is funny and where they think their strengths are. And it was a really pleasant place to work, and everybody was really nice, and we did have material on. But I never felt like that it was a great fit between us and Ed, for instance. It was just there was somehow something just a little tiny bit off about it, and sometimes those things are impossible to overcome. I mean, you certainly want to. You want to figure out that your job really is to figure out what it is that they want and to make sure that you can do it. And I never felt we had some success there, but not enough maybe to justify
Well, you mentioned when you
keeping
came
us on there.
You said that they assigned you basically, the task of writing for Carol and Harvey Korman. Would you have rather it been you could just submit sketches and have it more of a freedom of writing for anybody? Or?
No, I think we were quite happy to write it that. It wasn't a strict rule that that's what who we had to write for, because we had to clear every premise with Ed Simmons, and he either said go or not. There wasn't time to sit and say, come back and do this, or come back and do it this way or that way. It was like, you had to turn these things out, and there was a show every week and multiple sketches. I mean, some week, I know there was one we had 3 sketches on. There were some shows we had no sketches on. Sometimes we had to write crosstalk just between Carol and a guest, just in front of the curtain. So we didn't write everything just for Harvey and Carol. We wrote the typical sketch of the boss coming to dinner, and we can't screw this up because I'm up for that big raise, and there we had Carol, Tim Conway, and Harvey in the sketch. So it was that one went over great. It was just hard. It's hard to read the climate. There wasn't a lot of contact with Joe Hamilton. We never saw. None of the writers did. He wasn't a guy who was on the scene a lot. And Ed was there every day, but he wasn't hanging out with the writers. He was in his office. We were all in ours. you know, a lot of fun lunches, but it wasn't a lot of camaraderie, just standing around talking during the. But we still it still was a nice year. I mean, it was
Yeah.
a nice job. We always used to say it was great. We never had to use our headlights because he went home every day at like 5 o'clock. And sitcoms, you know, you'd be there till 12:30 at night doing rewrites. It was interminable.
Let's take another break.
Okay.
And we'll come back with more tales.
All right, thanks.